my first girl that I liked, and she didn't really like me. Let me go on to another one. I said, I remember my first date. Very exciting time. This girl actually liked me. I know, it's hard to believe, but she had liked me and she wanted to go out with me. So I said, sure, I'll take you out. Being the smooth, suave, sophisticated guy that I am, I took her to Burger King. Baby, you can get whatever you want. Money's no object. So we never went out again. I don't know why, but that was my first date. So wasn't real smooth. We talked about how I went on this date with another girl, and her dad made me move a piano for 2 hours when I got there. And then another guy came over while we were there, and I got the feeling that she liked him. So that date didn't go very well, and I remember that, and we laughed about this, and she was like, man, oh man, you know, and I was like, oh yeah, I've got many more of these. You know, we could go on. We had a great laugh. It was funny to talk about this. Yeah, I remember when this girl broke up with me, and she broke my heart. And I would cry, and it was just awesome. You know, it's thinking about, you know, how she just ripped your heart out and threw it on the ground and steps on it. That's funny stuff. You know, just laugh. We laughed. And before I knew it, man, 3 or 4 hours went by, and she was like, and I still remember this, and it got serious for a second, and she said, you're always such a good storyteller, Andy, but those stories sound a little, well, sad. She's like, you've always been really good at embellishing things. She said, are these true stories? I said, they're absolutely 100% true. You know, this was my life growing up. Don't you feel bad for me? You know, I mean, I'm like, this is what I have to deal with right here. This is me. You know, this is what I'm going through. So I said, and she said, well, you know, we had a good laugh, but she said these words, I'm just glad you moved on from that. And I said, you know, I have. I said, my life is great. I said, I have 2 wonderful children that thankfully are asleep in the back, and I have a wonderful wife, and I really have moved on. It's one of those things that at this moment and this time, as we're driving to Atlanta in the middle of the night, we can laugh and joke about all of those times that in that moment, in that time, as I look back, and I thought, you know, those times there would have been a time I wouldn't have been able to laugh at those things. You know, when they're happening and your heart is breaking and you just think that this is the end of the world as you know it. And now, you know, years later, you're just laughing with your wife and just having a good time talking about this. And I'm like, let's talk about more embarrassing moments. You know, this is fun. So we did. That's what we did the whole trip. And it was just wonderful, wonderful to do. But I want to talk to you about this moving on. It's hard to move on. You know, I see some people who have a really hard time moving on. I look at people who are my age, who are still living in the past. They're still living, I remember when I did this, and I was dating this girl, and man, if I could just get that, or man, I started doing this when I was younger, and I haven't been able to stop, and I'm continuing to do this, and it's just messing up my life, and I don't know what to do. And I just can't seem to move on from this spot. I just continually stay there. I see a lot of people, and I see that happening all the time. And as I was thinking about this, and they had given me a scripture, and I thought this is perfect. It's the scripture of Moses parting the Red Sea. And one of the things that happens to all of us is we all have heard many stories from the Bible, and you could probably quote most of the stories. What I've noticed a lot of times is that as we know these stories, we've never actually read them in the Bible. So what I want to do, I've just want to take a moment and see these, because I think that as you read this story, you're going to see some very fascinating things in there that maybe you did not know before. So we're going to go to Exodus chapter 14, and we're going to start in verse 13. And I'm just going to read this story to you because I think you're really going to like it. Now, if you remember, Moses was taking the Israelites out of Egypt. They had been in slavery. All the plagues happened. They were trying to convince the Pharaoh to let them go, let my people go. And Pharaoh and Moses got them out of there. Pharaoh said, "Go, just get out of here. I don't want you anymore. Just go." And so they did. And this is what happened. Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the waters so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." Then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of clouds also moved from in front and stood behind them. Coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to the one side and light to the other side. So neither went near the other all night long. Exodus chapter 14, 10 through 20. Then I'm going to go on. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land. So the waters were divided. The sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on the dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Then the Egyptians took up the pursuit, and all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen went in after them into the midst of the sea. At the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud and brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion. He caused their chariot wheels to swerve, and he made them drive with difficulty. So the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak, while the Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, even Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them. Not even one of them remained. But the sons of Israel walked on dry land through the midst of the sea, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When the Israelites saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they